The question with AI is when we're going to see it. This can be like the dot-com era. It can have characteristics of the crypto era, but I don't think anyone wants to relate it to other tech booms other than, maybe the mobile shift or the advent of the internet.
Welcome to a very special edition of OK Computer. I'm Dan Nathan, joined by Deirdre Bosa. She is the host of CNBC's Tech Check. Dee, welcome back to the pod.
Hi, Dan. Always love to join you.
All right. You just got off the air of CNBC talking about some new data as it relates to Anthropic. I know there's been lots of stuff thrown around about valuation and about, just how fast this company is growing. We know that Google and Amazon have made some big investments there. So we're going to talk about that. We're also going to banter back and forth about this article in the New York Times discussing, will AI be a bust? It's a feature on the co-head of equity research at Goldman Sachs. That would be Jim Covello. He's been a skeptic, but there's others internally that are very bullish on the whole AI trade, and for obviously good reasons. There's that Chinese wall between equity research and investment banking, and Goldman's going to be in the catbird seat for a lot of the investment banking going on around generative AI. Dee, let's just start what you just kind of got off the TV reporting on as it relates to Anthropic, because this is a great way, I think, to set up some of the discussion that we're going to have relative to, investors and research and the like debating the value of these investments in generative AI right now.
Yeah, so there's this whole narrative. Obviously, we see these valuations climb higher and higher. There's so much money to be raised in the private markets, but also from the mega caps, right? You mentioned that Amazon and Google have been throwing money at Anthropic, Microsoft throwing north of $10 billion at OpenAI, right? When does rubber hit the road? When do we actually see some revenue start to come in at these companies? So I got a hold of a document that Anthropic is showing investors. And it's basically their expectations for calendar year 2024. They show that they're expecting $1 billion in revenue. It doesn't seem like a ton for a company valued at, what is it? I mean, just huge amounts. But it's an increase of more than 1,000% year over year. So I thought that was interesting. They're growing their top line faster than their valuations are growing. So in a sort of weird twist, even though you hear OpenAI is, raising around at $150 billion valuation, in terms of its valuation to sales multiple, because that top line is growing so quickly, it's cheaper than it was 9 months ago, coming more in line with its public market counterpoint. Still way, way ahead of them in terms of that multiple, but just coming a little bit in line. Of course, Dan, I know you're going to throw cold water on that, which I'm glad you do, because of, let's say for a OpenAI, even if you think that revenue is $4 billion on $150 billion valuation, that's still kind of cuckoo.
Yeah, I mean, listen, and just if you look at the last few cycles that we've seen these large secular shifts going back, almost 30 years or so, I mean, we know that we see this sort of euphoria about these new technologies. Lots of money is thrown at it. People are not particularly too worried about those valuations, especially off a low base, right? When you start kind of booking some revenue, people do not expect earnings anytime soon, but you better have your customers recognizing the potential of the spend that they're doing on these technologies. And so when, and I don't know if this is even true or not, the information was floating some sort of data or speculation that Anthropic is looking to raise between $30 and $40 billion valuation. Who knows if that's going to materialize? But to your point, $1 billion in revenue, I remember, and you were probably reporting on it about a year ago when OpenAI just talked about how they crossed $1 billion in revenue, and now it's looking like maybe 3 to 4 in trailing, or maybe that's what they're projecting or so. So again, you need the uptake, right, of these things. And make no mistake about it, companies like Perplexity, which is a wrapper for a lot of these models, when they include Anthropic's Claude or they include OpenAI, into the mix, those are other ways to get the, I guess, the consumer, comfortable with using these models. And then there's going to be a whole host of other applications. Does that make some sense to you?
Yeah, but here I'll play devil's argument. This also goes towards the commoditization of all of these models, right? That spend so much money, billions and billions of dollars to develop. Within that investor document that I saw, it actually broke down revenue by business unit. Third-party APIs, that's the stuff that they license out to Amazon or Perplexity to build their applications on top of Anthropic's models. That is expected to account for as much as, I think, like 65% of revenue this year. Is that sustainable? I'm not sure because Microsoft, Amazon, Meta, Google, they're all working on foundational models as well, and they're all using different ones as they become more commoditized. Can you keep that main source of revenue or can you grow it at the same rate as you have this year and last year? I think that's a big open question.
Yeah, and just as a Perplexity user, and I know there's been lots of talk about this. I mean, I'm using it a lot more than Google search at this moment because I feel like, and not that I think Gemini is so bad. I'm just been conditioned over the last 5 months or so to go to Perplexity. I've chosen on different occasions to use Claude or OpenAI's ChatGPT, and I just like the interface and I like what I'm getting from it. But Google obviously has a huge opportunity given their search dominance. They have an amazing opportunity, but Gemini is nowhere in the conversation. It doesn't seem to be right now, outside of the Google ecosystem.
Yeah, but we're early adopters. We like things like ChatGPT and Perplexity and Claude. I think that what Google's going to be able to do is create Gen AI for the rest of us, for the mainstream. I don't think that you're going to be seeking out a chatbot. You're going to be doing your traditional, your mom, your uncles, whoever are going to be doing traditional searches, even maybe our kids, right? Who miss this really, you know, boom period of using chatbots. They're just going to continue to do Google and Gemini is going to be incorporated. And that's maybe how they're going to get to know AI. I don't know, but that could be a possibility. So Google could still.
Yeah, no, I don't disagree with that. And I agree on the chat bots. And the one thing I'll just say is that and we're going to get to Apple in a second and Apple Intelligence. But when I think about my iPhone and I think about some of the apps that I use, it's YouTube, it's Gmail, it's other, productivity suite products offered by Google. Obviously, Google search when I'm inclined to do it. With Gemini working in and around all of those applications, and all of them have over 1 billion users, some over 2 billion users. I love how you preface that by saying this is kind of Gen AI for the rest of us, these non-early adopters. And I think that's a big strategy of this Apple Intelligence. So this iPhone just dropped last week. I got it. I got the 16, not the Pro. Apple Intelligence is expected to work or supposed to work on both of those. And I, have every confidence that they will. And also the 15 Pro, which is last year's model.
Why do you have so much
Yeah,
confidence?
but well, because they've made that statement that it would, and if you look at all the marketing, which I agree looks a little disingenuous because the phone didn't ship with any of those capabilities. You know what I mean? So
That's what I'm saying. I've been testing out a Pixel, the brand new Pixel phone from Google, which is supposed to have all of this stuff. And it's been such a letdown. It doesn't, at least I don't know if I'm using it right, but it's not doing any of the stuff it promised.
yeah, and I guess you could say the same thing for Samsung. They've been marketing their phones as AI. So if Google, Apple, and Samsung are all falling short on phones that they are literally marketing as AI enabled, then it kind of brings you back to, in my opinion, a Gemini, which is working across all of these apps that you use on your device, right? And then also it brings me to, I don't look at Perplexity as a chat bot. I think of it more as an application on my phone or on my desktop, and it's really become part of my behavior. And I'm at a point where I'm not even testing Gemini versus Perplexity, that sort of thing. So again, integration is going to be really important. I don't think Google has done a great job of integrating it into Gmail and some of these other things. But the last point I'll just make is, and I'd love to get your take on this, we haven't even mentioned Meta AI. Meta AI, if you think about, the installed base they have there, I don't even hear people using it yet. I did see on Instagram, there's this kind of trend where people are posting this goodbye Meta AI. Have you seen this? And basically, it's like some legal disclaimer that people are posting. Because they don't want you using their personal data and pictures and the
Oh,
like.
right.
Yeah.
That comes up every once in a while. I remember in the old school Facebook news feed, don't use my pictures, don't collect it. I don't know though. I hear mixed things about Meta AI. In a way, I think it could be the dark horse because while we hear about the Apple Intelligence, but we don't have it yet. I mean, Meta's AI has been out in the wild for people, and I read something that actually a lot of people are interacting with it on WhatsApp, less so Instagram. Jim Cramer's a big fan. I heard him talking about it the other day. That's how he primarily gets it. But I guess like my question though is if this is all about distribution and you're treating Perplexity like an app, does that go away when Apple Intelligence actually works the way that it's supposed to? And a big test of that is they're working with ChatGPT, right? So are you going to open up your Perplexity app or are you just going to speak to your phone, which is already connected to ChatGPT.
Yeah, and I guess the other point I'll make is that after they announced this Apple Intelligence on June 10th at their WWDC, and it looked very exclusive to OpenAI technology, powering a lot of these, these kind of work and these processes, I guess you will, on the iPhone. They also kind of opened the door to Gemini and possibly Anthropic's Claude. And I think about that, and I say, okay, so if it's not exclusive, Apple has every reason in the world to kind of work with Google again. We know that they have that exclusive search deal for Safari and the like here. So, you might have a lot of optionality on the iPhone, but I just don't believe it's going to be built into the hardware the way the company would like to make you believe right now.
Right. And I guess it's an open question whether its own AI that lives on the edge in their phones will be good enough. I mean, that's my biggest question. Is Siri going to be good enough that you don't need to go to any other third party app?
Yeah. All right. So you brought up the skepticism. Let's talk a little bit about that because to me, sometimes I'm just playing devil's advocate, but I really try to dig in and kind of use some of my experience in thinking about these different tech cycles and really trying to get beyond some of the hype and think about some of the different, kind of waves of excitement and disillusionment. And you and I have talked about all of that. We know how that works. But going back to June, this is Sequoia. This is one of the, preeminent, venture capitalists in the Valley for 50 years, right? They're at the forefront of so many of these huge technologies and early investments. And you remember this one. This was on June 20th. We'll put it in the show notes here. AI's $600 billion question. The AI bubble is reaching a tipping point. Navigating that comes next will be essential. And then we also had Goldman Sachs put out this report, and this is obviously referenced in the New York Times article today. Gen AI, too much spend, too little benefit. So as I mentioned, Jim Cavello, he was the semi-analyst for, 10, 15 years at Goldman. He lived through the dot-com bust. He remembers the over-investment, right, that went into the late 90s and early 2000, 2001. And then obviously this very long period of just writing down these investments and watching a bunch of companies literally go to zero out of business. And then, there was plenty of companies heads down, kept on working, figuring out how to use that investment and moving into Web 2.0. And, obviously many of these companies are, half $1 trillion market caps or multiple $1 trillion market caps now. So let's talk a little bit about this skepticism because it's interesting within Goldman Sachs. And I just mentioned it, it's like they are going to be doing a ton of the Gen AI banking over the next 10, 15 years or so. So it's interesting that they have this debate this early, between research and banking.
Okay, I'm going to sound really snobby here for a moment. So forgive me, Dan. Forgive me, OK Computer listeners. When I read this article that you're referring to in the New York Times, they lose me in the second paragraph. Actually, they lose me in the first paragraph. This is one of the most, I don't know, I want to be polite here. It's a little bit tired in tech to talk about the billboards on Highway 101. We've seen this in every generation of technology, from mobile to SaaS to crypto to AI. And then in the second paragraph, he says, not that long ago, they were all crypto and now they're all AI. I hate this analogy so much because it kind of implies from the very start of this that AI is like crypto. And I mean, so many people here in tech in Silicon Valley would argue that they're nothing alike. And even, Dan, you and I covered closely the crypto boom. It never made much sense. We can say there was always some weird things about it. With AI, the only, some similarities. Yes, there's a hype cycle, but no one doubts. And I don't think Jim Cavallo himself doubts that AI is the real deal. It's just going to take longer to get there. Whereas crypto was multiple, Ponzi schemes piled on top of each other. And there were skeptics over whether, we're actually going to see the use cases. The question with AI is when we're going to see it. And even some of the stuff he cites, like the Sequoia paper, and, we labeled this the $1 trillion time bomb. That is true. Both of these things can be true. This can be like the dot-com era. It can have characteristics of the crypto era, but I don't think anyone wants to relate it to other tech booms other than, maybe the mobile shift or the advent of the internet. So I think that relating it to crypto kind of undermines this. Let's leave that aside. Yes, there will be, roadkill in this AI boom. There are going to be companies that are left to the side for sure.
Yeah, you're already seeing it in the private markets. And I guess in the public markets, it's just been such a narrow trade between obviously in NVIDIA. There's a handful of other names if you think about the picks and the shovels. And we know that's where a lot of folks want to go. But then obviously the hyperscalers. And we've also talked about the fact that, Memory got in the trade earlier this year. That would be Micron and the server makers, Supermicro and Dell. Those stocks have basically round tripped the entire moves. They had these huge rallies, spring into summer, and they've all come back, to the ground, you know what I mean, for some way, shape, or form. Micron reports Wednesday after the close, so by the time you're listening to this, it'll be very interesting to see the sort of guidance that they give. But I look at Taiwan Semi, which is basically at 85% of the high-end GPU, like the manufacturing, and obviously NVIDIA has 85% of the chip business. Both of those stocks are raging today. That would be Tuesday afternoon. Taiwan Semi 7% from its previous all-time highs. NVIDIA is about, I don't know, 14, 15% or so. So it'll be really interesting to see this year if those companies or those stocks can get back to those prior highs. I just want to make one other point about the crypto analogy. Is like, it wasn't just crypto, right? It was also gaming. It was metaverse. There was a lot of things wrapped up in that. And so and I don't mean you don't, but don't think for a second that when Mark Zuckerberg did that huge presentation of him within a metaverse, detailing how they are changing the name of the company. Okay, this is one of the most successful
Who could
IPOs
forget?
of the last 20 years. So they changed it from Facebook to Meta. Okay, and then they talked about the spend that they were going to do, and the stock went down 70% over the next year or so. And you know what else went down 70% from the 2021 highs? NVIDIA did, because they were using those GPUs that started at gaming, that got to crypto mining, and then obviously for metaverse, down 70%, Netflix down 70%, Tesla down 70%. So the way I think about this, it's really about sentiment. It's not about the technology. We can all agree that the technology is going to be transformative. A lot of people made that same argument about the internet, but most of the IPOs of that late 90s went by the wayside, and then there was a handful of names that became, again, half a trillion, multi-trillion dollar names. The NASDAQ, didn't make a new high from 2000 until 2014. Just think about that. You talk about a
Brutal.
trough of dissolution. So again, there's plenty of similarities, but I get it how it can be different.
They're different. I mean, exactly. And they're very profitable, wildly profitable versus the dot-com boom. The fact that a Meta is able to rebrand itself, go down 70%, and then pivot to AI and buy up a ton of GPUs. I mean, that's evidence that they're so well capitalized that they can do these things when they need to. I was at the side of the highway. I still remember it when they renamed themselves Meta. Who could forget that moment? But it's kind of amazing that they are. The more relevant example to me is Cisco. Right? I mean, they didn't die. They didn't go anywhere. They're still here chugging along, but they never regained that peak that they saw in the early 2000s. And that to me is sort of the fear for an NVIDIA, which I know lots of people have talked about.
Yeah, and the competition hasn't really come yet there. And so we obviously know the tremendous demand and the capacity restraints there. So it'll be interesting to see, Meta built that 100,000 GPU cluster with the H100s, then XAI was doing it. And then you think about the capacity that the hyperscalers are building out. At some point, if the ROI does not materialize for a lot of their customers, there's going to be a period of overcapacity, and the stocks and the valuations, both in the private and the public markets, are going to get hit. So again, none of us know when that's going to happen, but again, it's out there, and it won't be too different than some of the other cycles we've seen. But this technology obviously could be very different. So who knows? Last thing before we get out of here, the information had this story, I think today or yesterday, Tuesday or Monday, Microsoft AI chief shuffles unit leadership, pointing to shift in strategy. Now, we've been talking about this a little bit because all of NVIDIA's biggest customers, right, have been designing their own chips. Then they like to get there. They don't want to be, kind of sole source. But I want to just read this quote. Microsoft appeared to be doubling down on a strategy known as distillation. It involves using OpenAI's models to generate lots of data, which Microsoft then uses to train its own similar models that can perform nearly as well at certain tasks. So it's not just kind of trying to get second source or design their own chips, but it's also working aggressively to design their own models. So thoughts on that, because this seems a bit early, a year and a half or so, when Microsoft clearly laid out their strategy from a reselling standpoint of OpenAI technology, but also integrating it in all their productivity tools and the like.
Well, one, OpenAI is increasingly competing with them with its own enterprise product. Two, Microsoft hired Mustafa Suleyman. Why does it need Mustafa Suleyman for, billions of dollars in this take under faux acquihire, whatever you want to call it, if they've got OpenAI powering all of its AI? I mean, clearly its strategy has changed, and it wants to, exactly like you said, diversify, wants to make its own chips, but also wants to have control over its own models. This goes back to the point I made earlier about Anthropic. Right now, its biggest source of revenue by far is third party APIs. I mean, these companies don't want to keep relying on whether it be Anthropic or OpenAI for the foundational model. They're going to start, and they have started to develop their own, right? So where does that revenue go? I mean, what OpenAI is doing, right, is smart, creating their own enterprise product. So when that revenue goes away, they can go direct to customers, maybe Microsoft's customers. Anthropic is doing something similar. I mean, their line for direct API sales, that's when they go directly to a company and say, okay, we'll help you build the model using our API. You don't need to go to a third source like a Microsoft or an AWS to do this. That's growing. I think I saw like 15 to 25%. Probably they want that to be a bigger share than the third party, right? Because you cut out the middleman. This is all being negotiated right now. And I think everyone is trying to take more ownership of it because that means more margin and more revenue, which is what investors are certainly looking for to justify the huge spend.
No doubt. And also what you just detailed speaks to the potential for overcapacity built out by the hyperscalers, right? So if you think about like, the product that Anthropic is using right now, especially when a large part of that investment from Google and Amazon was meant to be credits back for their cloud services. So a lot of interesting stuff's going to happen over the next year or so. And I suspect on the valuation front, it's not going to be particularly bullish given how concentrated these trades are, at least in the public markets, because they're just very crowded, I guess is the point that I'll make right there. All right, Debo, we covered a lot of ground. I really appreciate you being here. Your original reporting is fantastic, as always. Hope to see you back next week.
Thanks, Sam.